Welcome in again. This is part two of our season preview of the PWHL, and I'm joined once again by Olympic champion, Olympic gold medalist, world champion, Team Canada alumna, and coach and broadcaster Becky Kellar, who is going to help us run down the teams. Welcome again, Becky. Thank you so much for joining us a second time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And yeah, this was going to be our chance to talk about the rosters as they're officially announced. However, I think that's delayed just a little bit from the league side, but we pretty much know what we're looking at for the teams from the waiver players that were released and doesn't sound like picked up. So we're going to go with what we know and get your expertise and point of view on what we're seeing. Does that sound good? And
Sounds great.
I'm sure you have a lot of insider knowledge that you're going to share with us. Um, and let's just start. I just pulled up on the screen. You're probably like flying here a little bit blind, but I don't want to go in order of alphabetical. Let's just start with a new team. Wow, literally New York that has new players, new coach, new home arena. So the New York Sirens and the number one overall draft pick, Sarah Fillier, are going to look a lot different this year. What are your thoughts on that team, and will they make the playoffs this time, and et cetera?
Well, I think this is the team I'm most excited to watch. I think they underperformed last year. I don't think them missing the playoffs was an indication of the potential that that team has. And I think everyone kind of knew it. I think that was the frustration within that locker room, was that they knew that they could be better. So they've been put in that luxury position, though, of being the first team out of playoffs, which meant that they got first draft pick. And so, I mean, they had a pretty amazing draft, and obviously taking Sarah Fillier, who I think that may be the player most people most excited to see how she fits into this league. It's this league can be tough. It can be very physical. It's sometimes harder on the skilled players. So it's a matter of how quickly they adapt. But I think her with Alex Carpenter could just be a deadly combination this year. And I think that's sort of where my eyes turn first and foremost when I look at that roster.
Yeah, and the two of them played in one mini camp game together, and she got a hat trick. So and Carpenter actually said they had not practiced together or done much in practice. So they just kind of found natural chemistry. And it looks like, the ever popular Jesse Eldridge is going to be on the wing with them. I think that's a great combo. And a player that I'm really interested in, of course, is Nora Toulouse from the Swedish league. She was the leading scorer there. She scored a nice goal in the mini camp game. I think she's on the second line. Everything's up in the air. But they drafted really well, as you said. El Harchi looks really good. Looks like Emmy Fecto from U Sports has made the team. And another draft pick who's going to be great to watch and keep an eye on is Maya Nyland Pearson. I don't know the D pairs, but it's just hard to look at any team and say they're not so much improved. And those names are just such big additions, as you mentioned. What do you
Well,
think of their
the
D?
depth, yeah, like I mean, Simpson stood out to me I mean, I only saw them play one training camp
Yeah.
game, but and she's a player that was at rivalry, and if she's pulling up your back end in your last pair, then you've got some depth on the defensive side too. Ella Shelton, who's just been incredible the last couple of seasons, and it's her steadiness, and I think that's what you need. New York had some real issues defensively last year in some of the breakdowns, and so a defender like Shelton, Nyland Pearson, that's going to be huge for this team. Adding Simpson, so I think that might kind of shore up some of what was going on the D side of things. You're right, Toulouse. Gabby Rosenthal caught my eye a couple times in the training camp as well.
Mhm.
Some one-on-one skill, but then a little bit of grit too. She went to the net a couple times and created some scoring chances. So be interesting to see that as a fourth line could bring some offense to this team too.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. You look at them, they basically have an MVP finalist, Alex Carpenter. They have a Defender of the Year finalist, Ella Shelton. They have a Goaltender of the Year finalist, Corrine Schroeder. They didn't win, but all of, their individual players and performances were outstanding. And now they have a new coach. So maybe just a little bit of a different, outlook or way of putting them together. He seems very positive. So I think all signs are go for New York. I think they're going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, and interesting to see too. Like you get a player too, like Elizabeth Jaguar, who arguably one of the best NCAA players ever. Can she take her game up a notch and bring that same level of play to the PWHL? So I think there's tons of potential on this team this season. Probably a new voice is what they needed as well. So yeah, I mean, this is a team that could very easily have gone from six to winning it all this season. I think
Yeah.
they've got that potential.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's move on. We'll just pull them up kind of at random here. So we've got the Boston Fleet. There's so many storylines with all teams. What's the main one for you with Boston this year, or that you're looking forward to?
Well, I think Boston was the worst team offensively in the league last year. They sat sixth in their goal production goals for. They had the worst power play, and I think it was 7.5%. So, I mean, you're operating at 7.5%. You almost want to turn down your power plays,
Right.
stick to 5-on-5. So, I think everyone's looking to see if this team can create more offense. Obviously, bringing in Hannah Bilka could be a massive piece to that. See if she can find any chemistry on that top line. Hillary Knight probably didn't have the season that she would have hoped for. So you start to wonder if you can get a little bit more production from players that have the potential for that. I look at Sophie Shirley, who was on the rivalry roster again and was outstanding at Wisconsin. And can she up her production? I think she only had 5 points last year. So I think there's some potential there. Some of the new faces that they've added for sure can help out with that. But I mean, that's where they need to get better. We know they were fantastic in net, and Frankel was, arguably the best goaltender in the league, definitely was in playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that they're solid that way, but they just got to find a way to create offense. And looking to the back end for that a bit too. Megan Keller was really the only D that contributed last year. So I think, with the introduction of Bard and Pesova, maybe they'll get a little bit more help on the back end.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. They had a slow start. They definitely, came together at the right time, which is what you want. But yeah, you'd have to be a little concerned that was an issue, and is that going to be the case again? Obviously, there's more familiarity now, but it was good to see Hillary Knight get a couple goals. It looks like they've slotted her with the playmaker and Mueller, and if Bilka can use her speed and that kind of thing, I guess Knight is known for just scoring slot goals and like just being in the right place at the right time. That's what she needs to do. So if that can materialize, that's obviously a bonus for them. And then the goaltending was interesting. They had a battle more or less for the third spot, and it looks like a friend of the show, Clara Peslarova, has taken that spot, which we're really happy to see. And probably we haven't seen again the final rosters, but Jillian Dempsey looks, she wasn't on waivers, so she's at least a reserve. And that's a nice homecoming story there, just being a longtime Boston player. So it's going to be chemistry. What do you think about the coach? GM Danielle Marmer is definitely one of the more bold decision makers, and of course Courtney Kessel is a great coach. What does that do for this team as they blend in these new faces?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of buy-in from this team because they see how close they got last year, and a team that just eked their way into playoffs and then went to game 5 of the final round. So I would think that there's a lot of confidence in their coaching staff, having seen what they did with this team in playoffs. And so I would imagine that, and probably very good culture in the room too. You don't tend to get that far in playoffs if things aren't pretty good,
Yeah.
solid in the dressing room. A lot of leaders in that room. So I would imagine when they're bringing the new players in that there'll be a lot of buy-in there. Got to give a little shout out to Maloney too, as
Mm-hmm.
the one and only. See that Brown?
There you go.
Ooh, she went to Brown for 4 years. Quinnipiac for a year, but spent her first 4 at Brown. The only Brown alum in the league right now.
Is she
So
okay? Yeah.
uh, go Bears.
Shout out. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's you kind of feel for the players that are coming from non-powerhouse, I guess we'll call it, or teams that were a little outside the main NCAA teams, but it's great that they were noticed and picked. So yeah, you keep an eye on those folks for sure. I skipped ahead as you Becky can see on our screen because I want to do like the obvious rival and playoff opponent of Boston, which is the Montreal Victoire. And uh, I don't. There's like, unfortunately, the big storyline again is like depth and injuries. They have obviously Kayla Barnes is injured. She did skate, so that's a positive sign. That maybe she's able to put weight on that ankle or whatever it was. But so she is injured, and uh, Dominika Lashkova still not ready to start the season. So that those are two very important defenders not there. And we're not sure about Catherine Dubois if she has an injury. We know that Kennedy Marchment is, I believe, on short-term IR. So here we go again with depth and just line up juggling and that kind of thing for Montreal. What do you see with this team?
Well, I think you nailed it when you said depth. Obviously, they did not feel that they had the depth that they needed going into playoffs last year when, what was it that Aaron Ambrose logged in that one playoff game?
60
Like 60
plus.
minutes of ice. So definitely not a recipe for success. So depth was the issue that they needed to address. So hopefully they can get some of those players back into the lineup and helping them out. And I think Kayla Barnes obviously being the biggest one because she's just such a solid two-way defender. Is going to take a little bit of the load off of Ambrose for sure. I'd look to Laura Stacey right now too. She had an amazing rivalry series, and I thought she was coming off of a good
Yeah.
season. She seemed to take her game up even another notch in that rivalry series. Led the whole thing in points. I believe she had 4 points. So, and just her speed and so her on a line with Poulin and Lundblom should be an interesting combination. And did not get to see any of their training camps. So I'm looking forward to seeing them play in person. Abby Maureen, I thought was so impressive last year when she got into the lineup, obviously a reserve player. And so she only played in that first playoff series against Toronto, but big, strong. I found she could be deadly on the power play off that back door. So that's a major addition, I think, to this team
Yeah.
to add to their depth. And yeah, so I'm excited to see this team. Obviously, they're in a similar position we talked about in Boston, that they are solid in net. And Debian and Chuli were by far and away, I thought, the best 1-2 in the
Yeah.
league last year, which is saying a lot because Minnesota's pretty deadly in
Yeah.
net.
Yeah.
Their 1-2 punch. So, they're solid back there. If they can get their depth shored up and get all these bodies back into the lineup, Jennifer Gardner added to this lineup can help with their depth. See her on the third line there. So,
Yeah.
but I guess the big thing when you talk depth too is the fact that every team has just gotten better and deeper. And so, how does that all add up one against the other?
Yeah. So for a couple of these teams, we're going to talk about. We might as well do Toronto next, but the injuries and the start of the season are going to be so key. Like, can they, hold on and stay in a playoff spot, or at least not fall out of the running? Although Toronto showed it's possible to turn that around, but with the injuries and there's no two ways about it. Losing Kayla Barnes or not adding Kayla Barnes is just big, even though they have the reigning defender of the year and Ambrose. But that was, you could just see that being so key to helping Ambrose with eating up those minutes. And so, can players in that secondary kind of tier like Michaela Grant Mentis, who had a good game in the mini camp, I believe, against Ottawa. Kristen O'Neill looks ready to maybe kind of take a step up. Players that they didn't struggle, but you maybe expected more, and they just took a little bit longer to kind of get their legs under them in the league. So do you see players like that, having bigger roles?
Well, if there's injuries, they're going to have to. If Kristen O'Neill's going to center the second line, and the thing is, when you're starting a season with injuries, if you were talking about the NHL, you'd go, okay, well, 80 games and whatever, and there's time. And this is what I love about this league is you've got 30 games, so you're starting your season at a point where if you're in the NHL, when you hit the 30 games left, this is when you're looking at playoff, you're looking at standings, every game is crucial. And so this league, you're starting there. So starting the season with injuries, it could be really deadly for a team. So how do
Mhm.
they manage that without those top players? And to me, that's just a buy-in to whatever the system is, and a heavy reliance to a little bit on your top line. Like somebody's got to contribute offensively, so they're going to have to start the season and be dynamite.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on Lena Lundblom, who by all accounts has been so impressive and is a bit of a bonus player for them being drafted, the last year and then not coming over. But
Smart.
so they didn't get Amanda Kessel, but they got Lena Lundblom. So, okay, they're
Well, I think you know what? I think on both cases they were just rolling the dice and going, okay,
Mhm.
we're going to take this person late in the draft, and will it work out? Will it not? With Lundblom, it looks genius now, and you
Yeah.
got someone really late that everyone else had sort of said, nah, she's not coming over, and kind of a smart pick. And with Kessel, I think again she was left to the seventh round because nobody else was willing to roll the dice. Montreal rolled, and that one didn't work out for them.
Yeah, no, Danielle Sauvageau is just, I mean, I don't know if Savage is the root of her name, but she is a quiet assassin there as a GM. She's willing to make these gambles, as you say, and love to see it. Well, let's then move on because the other team with injury issues or a storyline there that they have to overcome, of course, is the Toronto Sceptres with the reigning MVP leading scorer Natalie Spooner not ready for the start of the season, and we won't speculate too much, but she's got it. They and she have to do the right thing to make sure she's ready. So they brought in Daryl Watts, which is definitely a great impact player. But what do you think of their forward ranks without Spooner?
It's going to be tough to offset that kind of goal production, but I think you also, last year they seemed to have all their eggs in one basket, and Spooner was really just kind of threw the team on her back at one point in time and dragged them out of the gutter and into first place. So it was awesome for them that happened. I don't think it's something you want to rely on all the time, and so they're another team that's going to have to rely on some depth. I think Daniel and Watts together, and obviously they put Nurse down the middle. But those two, I think, are fairly similar in their style of play. They're very smart, cerebral, see the ice, playmakers, can score. So I'm really interested to see that line. I think they could be fantastic. And is Daniel really, to me, popped at training camp just with some of the little things she did, just the way she would find the passing seams and some of the little plays. So I think they're going to be fantastic. Emma Malte was another one that I thought had a good rivalry series.
Yeah.
They've got her on Team Canada playing on that top line now, and you start to really see her confidence grow. I think she's a player that when she first came into Team Canada, and I apologize, my dog's behind me whining.
No, please. Oh, that's
I'm not sure what she wants. But she was kind of thrown into a checking line, I think, because of her speed and her tenacity. But I think we all knew she had more, and you're starting to really see it. Like she's got some great hockey sense. She's got hands. She can score. So I love to see her on that top line and see what she's able to bring out of her line mates as well. I think Blair Turnbull's a player that's looking to maybe have a better season. I think at
yeah.
times she was frustrated, and I think we can expect to see a bit more from her too. So yeah, I think somebody's going to have to pull up their socks. And listen, if you look back at last season, if we were at this point last season, and you were talking about Toronto, Natalie Spooner was a fourth round pick.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe she was given the compassionate grounds to,
Circumstance. Yeah.
yeah, to go to Toronto. So the league obviously agreed, everyone agreed that she was a fourth rounder.
Yeah.
So nobody expected her to have the season she had. And so with that being said, somebody else now has to be that person
Yeah.
to step up for the team.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And I mean, we're looking closely at Sarah Nurse, who was, after all, the second leading scorer in the league. Just, Poulin was behind or second in percentage wise, but she's a points producer, and with Daryl Watts on her wing, I mean, most teams be happy with that as their top line duo. And you're right, Izzy Daniel, I think, is a great compliment there. She's so smart and she can adapt to a role. And I was asking you just before we started here about Julia Gosling on that third line. It looks like they're going to start with the power forward line, Hannah Miller, Jesse Comfer with Gosling. And Gosling has a lot of offensive upside, but do you think maybe that's a little bit of a coaching decision to shelter her just a tad, not to, put her right up on a first line or, a, expect big scoring from her at the start?
Well, and there's no reason why she can't be expected to produce on the third line, I think, you construct your lines and it's trying to figure out who's going to be good where. I don't mind the idea of a bigger, heavier line. I
Hmm.
think the one thing we saw from this league last year is that it tended to be a more linear league. And sometimes those power forwards had a bit more success because of the physicality. And so you might see a line like that get into season and they play a different game, a way different game than I would think the nurse line will play. It'll be straight up and down, bang and crash, get in on the forecheck. But again, sometimes those were the lines and those were the players that were having more success last year. So I am interested to see what that line can do with their size and strength.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah. And they had some shifts where they, took the other team a little bit by surprise if the wrong matchup got out there. So that's true. They might do some damage. And it looks like Noeme Nubawerova has made the team, Nemo. She's another banger and crasher. I think she's going to fit the identity there perfectly. But interesting on D that they basically have six D, and then they have Olivia Knowles as well. It looks like Rylan McKinnon, I think, is in the top six, but they don't have a lot of depth there with Megan Carter starting out on the IR. Are you concerned looking at that, top 6D for Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, the loss of Carter is going to be huge. I know when we watched this team last year, Troy Ryan really went to Larocque fast, and they played huge minutes.
Yeah.
And I know when we watched them last year, all year, our thought was this is not sustainable. It's not sustainable, and it seemed to be. I mean, they did seem to manage it, but you got to wonder if there's a point, right? There's more games this year,
Yeah.
30 games instead of 24. You still have a couple rivalry games built in, and so I would think that you're going to have to rely on your depth a little more and see what they can bring. I don't think, and I know having played in Jocelyn Larocque is now, I guess, 36. I played until I was 35, and it's the recovery. Sometimes it's difficult. So if she can still manage those minutes, that's fantastic, but it certainly doesn't get easier. So I think he's going to want to go to his depth a bit more. McKinnon will be an interesting piece, big, strong, can play the physical game. If he's got her on the second pair, he's obviously got confidence. I thought Flanagan was good last season. Love
Yeah.
the moves across the ice. And maybe a little bit more faith in the third pair. And I think that's more what it was. And you bring in Bernard
Yeah.
and put her with Monroe, and maybe you've got yourself a little bit more depth there and a little offense too.
Hmm.
I think that Bernard can bring some offense from the back end. So, which I think is helpful. And I think he was still trying to figure out exactly who's quarterback that power play. And
Yeah.
so you maybe have some pieces in there that can help out. But yeah, I know that was a question mark last year, and we'll see if they've answered that this season, if they can figure that out until
Yeah.
Carter.
Yeah. It's a little bit, being in Toronto, the Leafs used to try to score their way out of trouble. And,
They
this,
still do.
well, yeah. And this team, not quite like that, but with Spooner, scoring 30% of the team's goals and just, they were able to thrive that way. But they might have to adapt a little bit as well with some of the competition they're going to be facing. And we're excited, of course, to see if Reagan Kirk gets a few more starts, all of the goaltending pairs. So let's kind of, keep going with that storyline because Ottawa is one of the teams that, had that last year, and we noticed it most because I think Emirates Mashmar played every game, or at least got in every game, or maybe might have not played in one, but the workload for goaltending was a story there. So they drafted Gwyneth Phillips, who looks like she could be a great backup. So as we look at the Ottawa Charge lineup, other than the fact that they have a lot of defensive depth, it's very noticeable. What catches your eye here?
Well, I think you're right about the goaltending, and I think Phillips could maybe not just be a good backup, but maybe even really push for the number one spot. And you're right, that's something that I think that team needed, that they were a little reluctant to go to the backup last year, so they're in a better spot. This was a team last year that, I mean, they were in every game and then
Yeah.
kind of at crunch time just found ways to lose games, whether it be a big mistake in the D zone or, well, typically that's exactly what it was. So I think the depth on D, that's there for a reason. Savalainen is going to be a massive part to shoring that up, I think. And what a great pick for this team, because I think that's exactly what what their weakness was. They've got some good offense from the back end. I mean, Harmon's great offensive D, and
Mhm.
Bell and Jinsey Rose will jump into the offense as well. So I think really Teralova as well. So I think really what they needed was that big, strong, kind of gritty defender that they can put on the ice in the last minute of play and say, don't get scored on and get
Yeah.
the puck out. And so I think they got that. So that's going to be, a massive help for them. And then Serdachny up front. And there's another one that I think just fits the profile of what this league was last year, which is the big, strong players tended to at least be able to adapt early. So I would just expect that there's high expectations on her to produce.
Yeah. Having lost Daryl Watts and they needed to replace her offense, but they decided to add the double bonus of size and offense with
Yeah.
Serdachny. I think she's penciled in at center. I know they were experimenting with her on the wings, so we're not completely positive. But last year the Mrazova, Jenner, Watts line was so big for them. It looks like Vanisheva might be ready to take a step up. She was um, looking good as well in the games that we saw her, but just an interesting mix. It's going to be, an exercise in chemistry for many of these teams to see where players find chemistry together. So I sort of have this lineup written in pencil. Just wasn't sure, where I think Jenner is better on the wing, and don't forget about Gabby Hughes. It's an interesting lineup, and with Coach McLeod, and they literally missed the playoffs by one point or one
Yeah.
one win, in that last game. So
Yeah. Came down
it
to the last game. So they're right in there, obviously. And you look at all these teams, and for the most part, you could probably cancel out your top two lines when they go head to head. So really it'll come down to, depth, who can get scoring out of their third line, who can be better on their bottom pair. And everyone's gotten more depth. But I mean, you see that quite often. You look through the NHL and through other leagues where it's like top lines cancel out. So who can be better as you get down the depth chart? And so that'll be big. Ottawa obviously drafting early. That doesn't hurt. And you hope that you get a little bit more depth out of the draft that can help with that.
so here's a question, kind of a small sidebar. I was thinking, most of the teams drafted a forward and a D in whatever order in the first two rounds. So there were a couple of pairs that I was thinking, which pair would you rather have? For instance, Serdachny and Savalainen, Fillier and Maya Nyland Persson, Bilka and Peshova, or Barnes and Gardner. What of those pairs? Like I'm looking hard at this Ottawa pair, maybe Boston's, but do you have a feeling on those? I mean, Fillier and Nyland Pearson could wind up being the best simply because Fillier is so good, and if Nyland Pearson, catches up to what's happening. Do you have a quick take on that, or are you just going to say let's wait and see?
Well, I mean, that's the test, right? You got to make the prediction and then you got to either
Yeah.
look like a genius or not. So I'm gonna say, well, here's the one thing I will say is everybody was new in the league last year. Nobody knew what to expect. And so it became a matter of who could adapt. No one knew what to expect with the physicality. So that's a little different this year. Obviously, returning players have had a year of this, but even the incoming players saw it for a year. And so I would think that everyone would be able to figure out how to play their game a little earlier, which would bode well for a Sarah Fillier because again, she's a skilled player coming into the most physical league that she would have ever played in. So I'm not sure if early on my nod wouldn't be to Ottawa's top two in Serdachny and Salvalainen, but that later in the year that actually could flip flop,
Mm-hmm.
and you start to see Fillier come into her own because it took a while last year,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about this with like a Heisey where she wasn't the huge producer early on that she was in playoffs and predominantly in the second half of that Toronto series. So I guess it just depends on who figures it out quickly. But I'm going to suggest that Ottawa's going to figure it out quickly, but that New York might take over later on.
Slow and steady wins the race. I mean, yeah, how can you bet against Fillier? I mean, it's sort of like if Nyland Pearson just can stay steady and everything we expect from Fillier, that's a hard combo to beat. Well, let's check in on the Minnesota Frost. Is your dog? Is your
My
dog?
dog, every once in a while, she's got a real personality. She's just taken a notion she wants something. And so she's just standing here barking at me.
She
And I have no,
wants.
I've run, she's already been on a run, so she should be lying down,
No,
but
she wants to be on camera,
yeah,
like
maybe.
all good dogs do. Is this our last team, Becky? I've totally lost track. We did New York,
I think you
Toronto,
fit everyone, yeah.
Boston, Ottawa, Montreal. Yes. Okay. So last but certainly not least, in fact, not least at all, the PWHL Walter Cup champion, Minnesota Frost. And I don't know, the storyline here is just sort of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Let's just bring in, oh, by the way, just a super talented defender that'll just make the back end look crazy good and just sort of keep everything that was working at the end of the playoffs. Their lineup's pretty similar. So what catches your eye for this team?
Well, this is a team that put themselves into the absolute best position, which is just to eke into playoffs. So they set themselves up into the best draft pick position they could be and still make playoffs and then win it all. So, I mean, yeah,
Third overall pick. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So what a great position to be in, as opposed to Toronto, who gets the last pick and then went out of playoffs in the first round. So not you're obviously your ideal situation, but um, it looked like, when we were talking to Ken Cleveland in playoffs, he had his eye on Claire Thompson. So he really wanted that defender that could mobilize and bring some offense, and he's got that. Picking up May Batherson as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's looked good. So I think they're pretty solid defensively. Um, and again, you got a player like Taylor Heisey. Now, if she had been the player she was in playoffs all season, where would this team have been? And I think you can expect that from her coming in. That a player that started to sort of figure out, okay, I'm going to get hit. What do I have to do?
Yeah.
Uh, so I would expect that her and Grace Zumwinkle I thought looked fantastic at rivalry series too.
Yeah.
The scariest forward on this team might be Zumwinkle because she can be big and physical and drive by you, but then she can also be skilled and dangle. And so as a defender, that's a scary combo, right? Like, usually with a skilled player, you kind of know what you're dealing with. They're going to try to make a move, but with her, you don't know. And so that's a tough combo. And then you add Britta Curl to that line who can play gritty and's got tons of skill too. So, I mean, this team, it wouldn't shock me if they won it all again.
Mm-hmm.
Their 1-2 in net was great last year. And that was highlighted in playoffs where, you can easily substitute one out for the other and both of them can win you a playoff series. So,
Mm-hmm.
this is a dangerous squad. Michaela Cava, I mean, her in playoffs too, another player that just really stepped up when the moment was big. And so, yeah, I think this team to be reckoned with once again.
Yeah, they look good in the mini camp. They won both their games, and Taylor Heisey did not play. It looks like she has a knee injury, so TBD if she's ready to start the season. But she was skating in the practices and looked pretty good. I don't know if they're just being cautious. The top line, as we said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And what a luxury, as you said. I mean, I think Zumwinkle, she's not underrated, but maybe just sort of not as bright a light shining on her. But every time you see her, she does something in every game where, like, you're right, she'll just power by somebody and then she's got the hands at the net to just like do that short side roof it or something that you're just like, oh, okay, so she's got both on the go. And if they put their Czech players together, Shishova, we're calling, going to her pronunciation this year with Himlarova, who was their third round draft pick, maybe similar, but Himlarova is maybe a little smaller, I think, but a lot of skill there. And it's sort of, again, an experiment in chemistry, just who's going to fit where. And they've got some returning players. They did lose defender Emma Greco, who's gone to the dark side from their point of view to Boston. But yeah, Maggie Flaherty, I think, has been an underrated defender. So I don't see any holes in this lineup. It's just going to be, again, does it all come together? Is the Heisey injury going to have an impact at the start, but they look well set up.
Well, and I think the other thing you've got on this team is you've got someone like Kelly Panic, who is just going to give you consistency, smart, make the right play. I think she makes people around her better. And sometimes she flies under the radar as well. And then Lee Steckline, who could arguably depending on what you're looking at in a D, be the best in the league in terms of her ability to break the puck out and defend and be smart and make good plays. And I mean, she's the kind of D every team wants, right? So, I think sometimes, we're talking about some of their younger superstars, but the reality is those are the type of players that win you championships. And that's what we saw last year. So, and those two players still look pretty good in what we saw in training camp. So,
yeah, I think, other than Toronto with Renata Fast and Jocelyn Larocque, I think this decor is stacked. I mean, maybe they're top three. They can spread it out there with Jakes and now Thompson, whatever, combinations they put together. But what a luxury to just be able to look at those players and, whichever one's tired, well, okay, then, Thompson can go out if Steckline's not ready or just as a coach. I mean, you coach defenders. Oh, I want to ask you, and then we'll wrap it up. I was asking Coach Ryan, and probably all coaches have this in their head when you do have those strong D. And he said it's just an understanding with himself and Larocque and Fast, and I'm sure with Steckline as well. When they're on the bench and maybe not quite ready to go out, but we need you to go out there. And so an 80% Renata Fast, he said, still might be his choice if he looks at her, and knowing that that might be doing the player a slight disservice because they're not at their best, but it's the understanding they have. Does that dynamic take place for you as a coach? And do you've got their minutes in mind, but do you take that into account?
well, yeah, and I think you you only try to do it in clutch situations, right? If you know a player's just come off the ice, they're maybe not quite ready to go back, and you throw them back out there ahead of the rest of the pairings on the team. So obviously coaches are going to lean to that. Every coach does it, right? You get into one of those clutch situations and there's the D that you figure are the ones, or the player that you figure are the ones that are most likely to get it done. So you go back to them, and some players are better at managing that than others. Some can, you look at someone like Renata Fast and I mean, she's got an engine and she can go, and even if she slows down a bit, she's probably still a little bit faster than everybody else out there anyways. So yeah, for sure. As a coach, you definitely do that. But I think the big thing with all of these coaches is showing that they have a little more trust in their depth this year. Some more than others, but because you don't want to do that too often. You start to fatigue players too much, and you don't get the production you want out of them.
Right.
Start to risk injury and those kind of things. So yeah, you probably want to do it less this year than maybe you did it last year.
Yeah, the you know 24 games was not surprisingly, but for many of these players, the recovery days and in between was almost the biggest thing to get used to. And now with just an extra, 6 games and a longer season, I think that's going to be where a lot of the storylines actually happen with teams that are able to maintain a steady pace or finish strong or avoid injuries.
Well, when I was doing AHL games, players would come out of the NCAA and they're playing 40 games, and they're going
Right.
into pro hockey where they were playing 80 games, and at the 40 game marker they'd say they hit the college wall, and you'd start to see these players just fall off the map completely. Now, they're not playing more games in the PWHL, but I think what you're seeing is that they're playing a different style of game than they've ever seen, and so you saw it a little bit last year where some players just absolutely hit a wall where their bodies were like, wow, I'm not recovering anymore. So um I think that's a tough one when you're adapting to this league. And for the players that are new, hopefully the players that are in their second year have kind of wrapped their mind around that and understanding of what it is they have to do, one, to prepare for the season, and then two, to recover.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the toll on your legs, but it's the bumps and the bruises too. So you don't hit that wall at, the 20th game or the 25th game when you're coming into the clutch situation of the season.
Yeah. And then the playoffs where it just gets ramped up, and you don't want to be, as you said, kind of just hanging on, just like I haven't recovered and now I'm facing these overtime games and things like that. So yeah, I think that's an overarching storyline to keep an eye on, just injuries and the return of players that start the season injured. Are they able, because they're not playing as many games, to bring a charge of energy as the Ottawa team is looking for. But the Spooner or players like that, Lashkova, if they are able to come in midway and inject that energy, those are huge factors. So, okay, well, that's our wrap up. We won't ask for predictions because here at the Puck Drop Podcast, we are neutral. We love every team. I like to have a crawl going underneath. Like, we love everybody. If we say anything positive or negative, it's just in the spirit of loving to talk hockey. So, last year, I made the bold prediction that Montreal would not make the playoffs and that Boston would win it all. And for a while there, it didn't look very smart, but you can't predict. It's going to be so close. We can pretty much predict that, right? It'll come right down to the wire.
Let's hope so, because it made those last games last year so fun to watch when it comes down to who's going to win and lose the very last game of the regular season. You don't want people to lose interest in the last few games. So, I mean, that was best case scenario, I think, for the league. So I'd love to see that again.
Yeah, right. And the gold rule coming into effect. So everybody's got something to play for, and just looking forward to it. It's, as we're recording, it's 2 days away. Maybe, if you're watching, it's already happened, but the first games are set. So be sure to tune in wherever your local broadcast is, and we'll watch for you, Becky, on the call. Hope you have a great season. Maybe you'll come back at some point if you get a couple days off, but we really, really appreciate you taking the time today to do this season preview.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to it.
Okay, we'll see you out on the ice.
Yeah.
All right, bye for now.
PWHL Puck Drop Podcast.